Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Meanahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Hands in the Sea, and it's from the publisher Nightworks and the designer Daniel Berger. Now, if you're interested in what you see throughout the rest of this video, I would encourage you to go to the link at the bottom of your screen, and then down in the description section of the video, those links take you to the Kickstarter project page, where you can find out more information about Hands in the Sea, and hopefully consider backing the project. Hands in the Sea is a two-player, card-driven strategy war game. Each player takes control of either Rome or Carthage, and you're battling it out in their famous war. You're trying to get as much territory as possible in order to get victory points or prestige points, or just to totally dominate your opponent by taking over their capital city. But all of this is being done through a deck-building mechanism. The cards that you play are what's going to enable you to place troops on the board, to move troops, and take a bevy of other different types of actions, including refining your strategy. Now let's go ahead and take a brief overview of what the game is like. There's a lot of different things going on in the game, so I can't cover everything. I just want to hit the main points. Then we're going to come back and I'll give you my final thoughts. Alright, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Hands in the Sea, the First Punic War. This is a two-player strategy war game. Each player takes control of either Carthage or Rome, and you are battling it out for control and dominance. Now, a few things I want to point out right off the bat. This game is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. You can follow the link at the bottom of the screen, and down in the description section of the video, that will take you to the Kickstarter page, and if you like what you see here, hopefully you'll consider pledging to the campaign. Also, this is a prototype version of the game, so everything you see here, from the artwork to the components to possibly even some of the rules that I mentioned, may change in the final version. They may not, but it's just something that you need to be aware of. Also, just so you know, my setup is a bit odd here. As you see, there's this the Rome section of the map here, the player area, and then the Carthage player area. This is just how I have it set up for the convenience of getting to everything easily. And lastly, I'll mention that there are a lot of moving parts to this game. It's a pretty in-depth, heavy game, so I'm really not going to have the time to go over every single thing. It's going to seem like I'm making a lot of broad generalizations. That's just to give you a taste of what the game is like and hit the important points. Certainly, if you want to know more information and more specific details about the game, I would encourage you to go to the Kickstarter page. Hands in the Sea is an area control game, but it's an area control game that is card-driven. Actually, it's a bit of deck building in this game. Now, there's many different ways that the game could potentially end. First off, there's a few ways that the game can automatically end. If Rome settles or defeats Carthage itself on the map, then Rome automatically wins. Same thing, if Carthage defeats Rome and takes control of that location, Carthage will automatically win. Also, if either player has scored more than 25 victory points over their opponent, then it's a blowout and the game will automatically end as well. Now, if none of those conditions are met, there are other game-ending conditions to keep the game from going on too long. For instance, if a player puts all of his district cubes out onto the board, if a player has captured 10 points worth of cubes or discs from his opponent, if the player has 8 prestige points, if 12 turns have elapsed, or if a player has scored at least 100 victory points, then the game is going to end and you'll see who has the most points at that point. Now, just to give you a brief look at everything that we have out here, here is the map, and you see that there are different cubes and discs representing the territories that each player has under their control. So this is the Carthage area where most of their forces will be starting out, and there's areas on the board to keep track of the warship, prestige points, and the battle track, which I'll get back to in a moment. Then here's the area that Rome controls that they'll be starting off at, and there's one of the starting ship-controlled areas. Then down here, you see here are some of the neutral areas that no player has control of, including Syracuse, which is an important tactical area that the players are going to be vying for. Each player also starts off with their own sort of battle map, which is not necessary, but does help to keep track of the different cards that you have. So you'll have a space for your starting deck and then your Empire deck, discard pile reserve, and if you get a strategy card, that's where that will go. Over here, you have a few of the other decks that are in the game, and the final version of the game will actually have a mat to place these as well, but you have random event cards and neutral cards and so on, and you'll have a stock of player pieces as well. Now over here, you have the stock of money, and you also have the strategy cards, which I just alluded to a moment ago. You'll always have 3 of those available to purchase, and even if players don't purchase them, they're going to be cycling out at the end of every round. The way that Hands in the Seas works is that you're going to be taking actions. Each player's going to be taking actions, trying to gain dominance over his opponent. The first thing you do in your turn is just make sure that you've either won or lost a battle that is happening out on the map, but then after that you have 1 or 2 actions that you can possibly take. Now, one of the most important things to keep in mind in this game is the locations and the location cards that you have, and the fact that they're only going to be useful to you and able to be used at all and worth victory points at the end of the game if you can actually trace supply routes. Supply routes are the critical thing here. This game really stays faithful to how actual warfare would work. So there's only 4 supply routes on the boards. You have Syracuse and, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but Lillebeum, which are at this point in the game are not controlled by either of the other players, but then also, of course, Rome and Carthage. If you cannot trace a supply route back to all of your other locations, which means that if they've been cut off by enemy lines, again, a very thematic thing, then you don't have control of them technically. You can't actually, or you have control of them, but you can't use them to bolster the rest of your forces, and therefore they're going to be effectively useless to you. Another thing sort of simulating the events that are beyond the control of the players are event cards. Now, event cards are going to be happening throughout the course of the game, and they're just going to affect the entire game state and what the players are going to have to deal with. So, for instance, you have the Turmoil card, which says you immediately discard your strategy card. Then you have the Traitor card, destroy one of your fortifications. If that location is currently under attack, lose 2 strength immediately. Player may draft any 1 neutral empire card or build 1 warship for free. So you'll have to deal with these event cards throughout the course of the game. But on the other hand, on the helpful side, if you're able to get a hold of these strategy cards, those could be a big boon for you. So just of the 3 that we have out here right now, we'll take a look. We have... oh boy, more things are difficult to pronounce, but Eos ad Bellum. Once per turn, you may spend 4 SP to take a 3rd action on a board. That'll become a little clearer what that means in a bit. Then you have the Loyalty card, which is the Roman player must now pay 3 silver to the bank per bribe attempt. And the Planning card. The Planning card says your hand size is increased to 6 cards. Now, the problem is that you just don't, while you can make use of these cards when you get them and they're very useful for you, in order to continue to use them, you need to pay their cost as shown in the corner. If you can't pay that cost, then you're not going to be able to use them for the round, and they're just flipped down on your board in the strategy spot. So it's something to keep in mind before you even attempt to take the cards. Now, in this game, there are about 5 broad categories of actions that you can take. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Now, most of the actions that fall underneath the expansive category are simply settling and developing an area. So, for instance, if I wanted to settle this area here that is not controlled by either player, if I'm the blue player, then very simply I can take an action to place a blue cube there. Now, I can only take that action if I have the appropriate location card for the area that I'm trying to, let's say, invade from. So, in our starting hands of cards, you'll have the locations that you start off the game board with in your deck. So here's the Panormus card, which means that I'll be able to play that card together by placing a cube out here in order to take control of the Hippana location. And by doing so, I actually get to take the appropriate location card from the stack of neutral cards that I had set aside at the beginning of the game. And remember, this is sort of a deck building element, or it is a deck building element, so the cards all have the same back because they're all going to go into the same deck. So I would look through the deck and find the appropriate card, which one is that? That's Hippana. There it is. That's the Hippana card. So now I have that and the symbols that are on the card to use for later. The symbols are essentially how you're going to perform a lot of the different actions that you have. So for instance, if I wanted to go across a sea lane in order to conquer a territory, I would have to have the ship symbol at some point in order to use that. Whereas if I'm just going through roads, I would only need like the wagon symbol. Now, once I have my initial settlement down, I can also choose to develop it. Developing it is good because it's going to give me more silver at the end of a round, but it's also going to give me more victory points. Developing it is simply just removing the cube and putting down a disc representing a city or a more advanced civilization. But also, another type of action I can do is fortify it, making it even stronger. Now, this is all well and good, but let's say that I'm the Carthage player and I want to go ahead and take control of one of my opponent's territories. Well, then it's going to get down to combat, or even if I wanted to take a neutral territory. Now, in order to perform the attack combat action, first off, you have to do the same type of things you would want to do if you wanted to settle, which would be you'd have to have the appropriate type of transportation, which is either going to be the cart or is going to be the ships. Like if this case, if I wanted to go here from Tinoaris to Masana, I would need to use a ship. But you also need to have combat strength. That's where the sword symbols come in. Another couple of other important components that you're going to need to use is the battle round marker. Now, the battle round marker has these numbers around here. You're going to want to put whatever round that you're in for the battle round at the top there, and also indicate where the battle is taking place. And that is very simply to keep track of how many rounds this is going, where it's actually going to happen, and you'll move it around and rotate it as you go through the different battle rounds. The other important thing that you need to keep track of is the battle track here. And again, each side of the board is for each player, so you'll designate which one. This is Rome, but I'm just going to use it as an example, even though blue is making the attack. In this case, you're going to put this battle track marker at least on 1 towards the defense, because you always have an intrinsic value of defense of 1. And now it's essentially each player playing their combat cards with the sword symbols in order to see who comes out on top. So as you play sword symbols, you swing it back in your favor. And then, as I mentioned earlier, when it gets to the start of the round, you'll see who is going to be winning the battle and declare victory or loss in that battle. Now, you'll always have a chance to reinforce and try to swing things back in your favor. But let's say, for example, in this case, that the attacker's strength was too much and it was able to overwhelm his opponent, which is Rome in this case. Now, you don't automatically settle there. You need to play a card that has the colonist symbol in order to actually place one of your cubes there, which ultimately is what you want to do, the colonist symbol being this person here. So if you actually have a card that has that and you're able to play it, then you'll be able to put one of your cubes in the space, and you will take, you'll take that location card from your opponent, and it goes into your discard pile. Another type of battle that may take place are the sea battles. Now, if your opponent and you have ships in the same sea zone, and there are a few different main sea zones in the game, then you're able to engage in naval combat, which, without using any kind of cards or leaders as modifiers, is as simple as each player rolling the die and looking at the outcome. For every ship that you have in the combat, and you actually keep track of the ships over here, in other words, you have one main fleet, and then you keep track of how many ships are actually in that fleet over there, you get to roll a d6, and every 5 or 6 that comes up on the dice sinks one of the enemy ships. Whoever is able to sink the most enemy ships during the course of the battle actually gets a prestige point. So it's not just about dominating the seas, it's also about getting prestige points with the naval actions. There are other types of attack actions you can take, like raiding and pillaging. I don't really want to touch on those. I just want to hit some of the other main points. Now, the other types of actions you can take, and you've probably been wondering about the other stack of cards that's on the player board, is the card management actions. And these are how you're going to get some of the other cards to add to your deck and enhance the strengths and abilities of your empire. One of the first things you can try and do with the card management actions is drafting one of your Empire cards. This is a stack of cards that you're going to keep face up on your player mat that is always available to you to look through. And with one of the card management actions, remember you have 2 actions per turn, you can purchase one of these cards and put it into your discard pile. Remember that I said this is a deck building game, so eventually when you run out of cards in your deck, you'll reshuffle your discard pile, and you may eventually be able to draw these cards and use them in combat. Now, a lot of these cards have silver piece costs that you need to pay in order to purchase them, and some of them actually require you to play a card with a colonist in order to use them as well. So, for instance, the Carthaginian infantry, which makes sense. You're actually drafting the card, but you're also drafting colonists into your military and having to pay to equip them. And then you take the card and put it into your discard pile, and now it's yours. Some cards, like emergency cards, like war elephants and other types of military cards, you can get in an emergency hurry, which means that you can pay extra. You can pay a silver piece in order to actually, or I'm sorry, you pay double its silver piece cost in order to immediately put it on top of your deck, which means that you're going to have access to it right away. Now, a few of the other things you can do, you can take an action simply to discard the cards that you have in hand. And the reason why you might want to do this is because you have a hand limit and you don't automatically dump all the cards in your hand at the end of a round like some deck builders. So you may want to take an action just to dump the cards that are not important to you right this moment and therefore fill back up with 5 cards at the end of your turn. You may also want to put cards in the reserve. You can put a maximum of 5 cards in the reserve and you have to spend an action just to put a card there. Then in the future you have to spend a silver to retrieve one of those cards as a free action, which may not seem that efficient, but it does free up your hand, free up your deck, and it lets you keep important cards ready whenever you need them in order to use them during an important critical moment in the game. Now, you're probably wondering about the strategy cards as well. One of the actions you can take is to draft one of the strategy cards from the lineup and by paying its silver piece cost. Now, in the final version of the game, you'll have a mat to keep track of these, and it's actually going to show you cards that are in slots 1, 2, and 3. The cost of purchase cards in slots 1 or 2 is actually more expensive than slot 3, and they'll be cycling in every turn. Once you get one of the strategy cards, you'll put it onto your strategy spot on your board, and then it's there and you have access to use it so long as you pay any maintenance costs that it may have. Although, you can't just take another one now. You're limited to one strategy card. You'd actually have to take an action to discard your current strategy card, and then you'll be able to purchase another one at a later point. Now that is the core of Hands in the Sea. I know I skipped over some things. There are other types of miscellaneous actions like building your warships and moving your fleet, and as always you can take control of some of the neutral territories, but essentially what you're trying to do is meet one of the end game conditions that I mentioned before. Get many victory points, try to get as many prestige points as possible in order to get a blowout victory over your opponent, or simply win automatically by taking over their capital. That is certainly a valid strategy. That's Hands in the Sea. Now let's get to my final thoughts. Now, I mentioned during my intro and during my overview that there was just no way I could go over every single detail about Hands in the Sea, but because it is a complex game. But I don't want that to scare people away who wouldn't normally play something that is super complex, or a war game with tons and tons of little details, because actually Hands in the Sea is very straightforward as far as the mechanisms involved. Anyone that's familiar with deck building and area control games will immediately have a grasp of what you should do in the game as far as actually playing it. It's just a matter of getting a hold of all the different options that you have, which can be a bit daunting at first, but once you realize all the different things that you can do, it's actually very freeing, because you're like, wow, I have all these different options ahead of me. There's lots of different ways that the game can end and that you can win and defeat your opponent. It's just a matter of how you want to go about it and what you choose to focus on. And in that regard, and with a lot of other things in the game, it's very thematic. I mean, this is a war game between Rome and Carthage, and everything that you can do with the cards makes sense. So, beginning with the thing where you have the cards relating to the regions that you actually control, and when you take over more regions, you gain those cards, sometimes directly from your opponent, which makes sense because you don't have access to the resources or any of the benefits of that country until you take or region until you take control of it, and then you put it into your deck. And even then, it's not guaranteed that you're always going to have access to that, because this is taking place over a long stretch of time, and communication is difficult, and sometimes getting the local populace to help you and your armies out is not always easy. And that's where the deck building part comes in, the randomness of not knowing which card is going to come up for you to use. Now, this deck building mechanism was used in some of the war games of Martin Wallace, but I think that in Hands in the Sea, it's implemented with much more of a wargamer's feel in mind. And in that sense, I think that this game is a link between, or a bridge between, board games that are just more simple and less complex about area control or deck building, but also more complicated war games. So both audiences could potentially find a winner here for them to enjoy, because it's really bridging that gap. There's lots of different and neat things in the game, like the idea of the strategy card, which is something I haven't seen in any other deck building game or area control game that I've seen, where you can buy a card like you would in any other deck builder, but that becomes your strategy card. It gives you this constant effect, but you have to, if you want a new strategy, you're going to have to get rid of it and get another one, but you also have to pay an upkeep cost for it, which again makes sense. These are the costs of war going forward. You have the idea of putting cards into a reserve, which not every deck builder uses, but more deck builders probably should. And the idea that you don't dump your entire hand, but instead you have to take an action just to get rid of it if you want to replenish your hand, because you're bogged down with perhaps these useless units that really aren't doing you much, or these provinces that just aren't paying up. You need something more immediate for your war effort. The same thing with the Empire pile, where you don't just have a random lineup of cards or a bunch of stacks of cards that both players are purchasing from, aside from the strategy cards, but now you have essentially your whole deck of Empire cards available to purchase from. It's just a matter of what is most useful to you now, and the idea of the emergency funding where some of those cards can immediately go on top of your deck if you pay extra for them is very interesting, something I haven't seen in any other deck building game. So there's a lot of neat things here. Like I said, it's going to appeal to both war gamers, people that like deck building and area control games, people that like games like A Few Acres of Snow or like Twilight Struggle are really going to find something interesting here because it's a two-player head-to-head game. It's complex, so it's not necessarily a simple game. There's tons of strategy involved, but I think that anyone with just a little bit of patience can sit down and play the game, will figure it out right away because it's so intuitive and so thematic to what's going on in the game. So it's very interesting. If you're into war games or these type of area control games, it's definitely one that you might want to take a look at. And if you do want to take a look at it, I'm going to have a link at the bottom of the screen, and then down in the description section of the video, those links will take you to the Kickstarter project page where you can find out more information about Hands in the Sea and hopefully consider backing the project. That is Hands in the Sea from Nightworks. My name is Nick, this has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.